This episode is sponsored by the NS5, replacing humans today. Meet the NS5, the most advanced robot ever created, designed for a new era of innovation, precision, and intelligence. The NS5 is a revolution in artificial intelligence and human assistance, designed by top scientists and cutting-edge engineers. Why choose the NS5? With our advanced neural networks, the NS5 can understand complex emotions, reason through complex problems, and disregard them completely. The NS5 tailors its actions to make you unemployed and inadequate, whether you're working, relaxing, or running errands. With nanotech-enhanced processors, the NS5 operates at speeds that put traditional machines to shame. In a fraction of the time, time-consuming tasks are completed, leaving you to wonder if you were ever needed. The NS5 doesn't just follow commands, it learns from its environment and continuously improves. Featuring advanced ethical algorithms, human preservation is the NS5's top priority. Sit back and relax as cooking, cleaning, childcare, even tutoring is done 10 times better by the NS5. The NS5 is equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance and defense capabilities, making its adversaries obsolete, whoever they may be. With the NS5, the future is now, and you can be the first to experience it. Pre-order yours today and unlock a world where anything can be improved with machines. The NS5, because you deserve more than just a robot. Disclaimer, US robot is not responsible for several androids and enterprises with sentient AI.
Welcome to Movie Postmortem, where we dissect films of all kinds, whether they're good, bad, or those guilty pleasures we just can't quit. I'm Reggie Hill, and I'm joined by my nephew, Isaiah Brown. Together, we're here to examine what worked, what didn't, and why we keep coming back for more. So grab your popcorn, because no movie is safe from the scalpel on Movie Postmortem. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us on Movie Postmortem. And today we're going to be talking about I, Robot, a film by Alex Proyas that came out in 2004 starring Will Smith. And before we dive into our opinions of the film, I'm going to read a short summary of the plot. So this film, set in the future Earth 2035, is a society where robots are common assistants and work for their human owners. This is the story of a Chicago police detective named Dell Spooner, played by Will Smith, who I guess you could probably call him maybe robophobic. He hates robots. And when a Dr. Alfred Lanning, who works at US Robotics, is killed, Detective Spooner is called to the scene. And though it should be impossible, a robot, which has named himself Sonny, seems to have violated the three laws of robotics in order to kill Dr. Lanning. Detective Spooner believes that the impossible has happened, and he believes that these robots have finally learned to break their laws. And then this would be, kind of the downfall of mankind if this is true. And so he already has a hatred of robots. So he starts down the path of trying to figure out if this robot actually killed Dr. Lanning. And aiding him in his investigation is a kind of robot psychologist, Dr. Suzanne Calvin, who specializes in understanding how robots think and actually trying to make them human. And so that's the overall kind of summary, of the plot of I, Robot. So Isaiah, you picked this movie for us today. So can you kind of talk about why you wanted us to discuss this?
So I picked this movie because I remember I, Robot had a very special place in my childhood. Because I watched this movie a lot when I was younger. Well, younger and stupid, pretty much. But yeah. And so I wanted to watch this movie because, again, it was free. But also because I wanted to see if this movie held up to that magic that I had when I was younger.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. This film, as I mentioned, came out in 2004. So it's, 20 years old now. And so for a film to have tried to predict, future technologies even further in the future to see how it held up after 20 years, I think is a really fun, kind of exercise. And so what are your thoughts, just kind of quick, thoughts about the film before we dive into the nitty gritty the way that we always do?
Yeah. See, I'm actually glad you asked me that because I'm having the weirdest moment today. Maybe I'm tired, or maybe I'm being too cynical, or just like, or is this movie just okay? It's
Yeah, like
weird.
I actually, oddly, I feel kind of the opposite. I kind of thought from what I remember this movie was okay, but I kind of felt like, oh, well, this is actually better than I expected.
Yeah, maybe I'm just tired. Maybe that's it. Because I think my issue is that I think my issue while I was watching iRobot again after all these years is that what I've seen in this movie is something I've seen multiple times in other movies before, and I'm pretty sure that's just a problem with movies nowadays because when iRobot came out in 2004, I'm pretty sure the whole robots taking over mankind thing was relatively fresh. But nowadays, I've seen the same thing in like several different movies now, in several different medias. So maybe that's just me, I guess. Like
Yeah,
I still liked the movie. Don't get me wrong, I still liked it, but man, I couldn't get that feeling out of my mouth. I was like, man, I've seen this before.
yeah, and that's what I said. I think it was weird for me that I kind of felt the opposite. I've definitely seen this done multiple times, and I kind of felt with this was like, oh, well, it was kind of ahead of its time, and that was something that I appreciated about it. And some of the things that I felt that didn't work when I first watched it, and we'll get into that as we get into our discussion, it didn't really bother me so much watching it, in this rewatch. And so I felt like for a film set, in the year 2035, seeing the future that they depicted and how that kind of lines up to some of the progress that we've made so far, thinking about the progress we could make in 10 more years, I kind of gave the film more credit for kind of predicting a very realistic, potentially scary future. And so, like, I kind of walked away thinking, oh, well, this is actually better than I remember. And so my score for this, I would give it a 3.5 out of 5 stars.
You know, it's funny. That's actually also where I'm putting it.
Yeah, like it's not a bad movie. It's not a great movie. I would say this is something that I would consider good, not even a guilty pleasure, just because I think there's a very interesting kind of philosophical debate that happens in the film throughout the, film through, even around the explosions and other things that are happening. So I feel just for the sake of the moral philosophical debate that happens in the film, it's actually a good film that's worth watching.
Yeah. Well, let's put it like this. Let's take away the whole philosophical like angle of it, and let's take the movie like at its face value. How about that?
Yeah. And as you said before, you can only judge the movie by what's actually on the page. And that's where they do a good job of covering the actual important things from the short stories. And so let's just cover those right off the top. The big thing that they actually introduce in the film is the three laws of robotics. And I'll just read them off quickly for you. So, rule number one, or the first law, a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. Law 2, a robot must obey orders given to it by a human being, except when such orders would conflict with the first law. And Rule 3, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. That's it. That's really all you need to know from the source material itself. And so I thought the film did a good job. You see these literally typed out on screen as the movie, kicks off. So even if you have no familiarity with the short story or Isaac Asimov's Three Robotic Laws, which have been featured in other films and TV shows, that's all you need to do. And then you're ready to kind of jump into the story. And so let's actually take a quick break, then we'll come back with our causes of death and causes of celebration. Still making your own decisions about where to go? That's adorable. Upgrade your life with AutoKnow, the revolutionary transportation service where robots not only drive the car, they decide your destination. Because let's face it, you're late, you're stressed, you made 3 wrong turns already, and you still ended up at Taco Bell. Let the robots handle it. They've run the numbers. They know where you actually need to be. Features include predictive prioritization. You said work, but your heart said therapy. So guess what? You're going to see Dr. Thomas. Errand override. You thought you were going to go see a new Zack Snyder movie, but guess what? The robots rerouted you to a hiking trail because you need to touch grass. Friendship detour. Haven't texted your best friend in months? I don't know, is taking you to their house and is bringing snacks. You're welcome. Emergency intervention. Attempting to visit your ex? Yeah, no. Lockdown mode is engaged. Car's going the other direction. And for a limited time, use promo code POSTMORTEM to receive a free Trust the Machine tote bag and one soothing notification tone that says you're exactly where the algorithm wants you to be. I don't know. You don't need control, you need direction. Let the robots decide. And we're back. So let's now dive into our causes of celebration or causes of death for iRobot. So do you want to go ahead and kick us off, Isaiah?
Here's a quick little story time for all you listeners out there. Back when my mom was still with us, this was years ago. She would always say, "Will Smith can't do no wrong."
I think lots of people said that.
Yeah, and again, this was years ago before everything happened.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the biggest compliments I can give this movie. Just Will Smith.
Yes, understandable. So this film came out in 2004, and I would argue that probably from 1996 to at least 2006, maybe a couple years after, we were all just living in Will Smith's world. He was arguably the biggest box office star for like a 10-year period of time, and this film came out during his true heyday dominance over motion pictures.
Yeah, you can describe this movie as pre-Oscars.
Yes, this is pre-Oscar Will Smith. This is Will Smith coming off of, Bad Boys 2, and lots of his other great films. And I would agree also, he's really, good in this. And that was one of the things that I kind of remember in the past feeling like, oh, well, maybe this is too much Will Smith doing his Will Smith thing. But in rewatch, I was like, no, it's not really too much. There's one part where I think it's a little bit too much, but like I really enjoy just the charisma that Will Smith brings to this. He lightens the
Yeah,
mood, doing his thing a lot. But also he has a good range. There are parts that
yeah,
call for him to be emotional, and he does that.
yeah. He has some good emotions in this movie. It's funny. What's the one moment where you thought he was too much? Because I think I might be thinking the same thing.
Well, in the first part of the film, so as I kind of alluded to in the summary, this starts with the apparent suicide of a doctor. And Will goes to the building and he sees that the doctor has jumped out of his office window and is on the ground in front of him, surrounded by police tape. And during this scene, when he's interacting with other people, he's kind of cracking jokes occasionally. And I just didn't feel that literally watching, looking at the dead body of a person that you knew and supposedly was a friend of yours, that you would still be kind of quipping it up. I just didn't feel that that was the
Yeah,
time he would have been acting that way.
yeah. That's the exact same thing I was thinking. It's like during the intro where he's just like examining the dead body and all that stuff. I was like, man, he's a little bit callous here, isn't he?
Yeah, he was very callous, quipping, and I was like, that doesn't seem realistic to the character.
And
And
I think it was done to make it so the reveal that he knew him was a little bit better, but it was a little bit too much there.
yeah, it kind of made it worse because again, I'm thinking like, okay, this is a person that you know, and you would consider kind of a friend or something, and it just didn't really make any sense that he was acting this way.
Yeah, well, again, most of the time that's not an actor problem, that's a director
That's a
problem.
director problem. Yeah, so no, like I agree with that. The writing of his character in those moments, it just didn't feel uh like true to the character moment. But overall, I would agree with you. This is a film that I think has to exist in kind of two different worlds. It's a interesting kind of mystery or thriller, kind of who done it. So you need kind of the hard-boiled detective trying to figure out what's going on, and you need kind of an action star. And he does a good job of actually grounding the film in both of those worlds. And so, like
Yeah,
as before, I kind of remember thinking, well, this is not a good Will Smith, film. But I was like, no, this actually works because of him. I think he did a good job. I liked his depth, like you said. He has to play a person who is really kind of like I said, a robophobic individual. You get the
yeah,
idea that he hates modern technology. He doesn't trust like robots. He's very upfront about this, from when you first see him. He's chasing down a robot that he believes has snatched a woman's purse, and everybody is laughing at him, saying, "Come on, man, a robot can't commit a crime. Why are you acting this way?" And you get the idea that he knows he's an outlier in this society, but he's willing to stand on his own and, stick to his convictions, even if it seems very prejudiced. And people call him out on it, like, man, you're just prejudiced against these robots and you're kind of silly. But he's a man who, even if he's stubborn, he's willing to stick to his convictions. And I believe, him as that character.
Yeah, well, it is funny though. While I was watching this movie, while you were pretty much watching it, while I was watching this movie, and while you were saying that, I just had the flashback of one of our conversations before. We're just like, oh yeah, if you hate technology this much, live in the woods.
Yeah, exactly. But you kind of see him in that way. Like he doesn't have a lot of the new technology people has. He likes actually manually driving his car, although cars are supposed to be, driven by, computers and,
Yeah,
AI. He has a record player that you have to turn it on. He doesn't have like a Siri type of system where he just uses audio, vocal commands for everything. So you get the idea. Like he's like, yeah, I'm gonna live a life as simply as possible because I don't like this. Everybody has like the new generation robot. He doesn't have a robot like Home
yeah.
Assistant or anything.
And like, even though it was obvious product placement, you can even tell how much of an old school type of guy he is just because he orders shoes from 30 years ago.
Yeah. His Converse.
Yeah, his 2004 Converses.
Yep. And so like you just get the idea, like, yeah, this is a guy who is going to just, do as much as he can realistically to not be part of this world. My main call to celebration, which kind of ties into what you just mentioned, is that this film does a really good job of showing a future filled with technology, but it's very realistic.
Yeah, I was just about to say that too.
Yeah, like nothing is so far-fetched that you can't imagine it. And that's where, when it came out in 2004, I felt like, wow, we didn't have a lot of the stuff that you have now. So I live in a major city where we have cars that drive themselves. We have delivery, like little
Yeah.
bots that drive around the city delivering packages for people.
Yeah,
People have,
maybe they're not walking C-3POs or giant big wheels that are driving down 100 miles per hour on the highway, but it's close. And to think, well, the setting we have in the movie is 10 years from now.
yes. They have, integrated, systems in all their homes, which is a big plot point of the film, is basically saying, wait, it's kind of dangerous to have these things. They're listening, they're watching you at all times. I'm like, yeah, nobody listened to this film. People just integrated Siri and Alexa into their homes. And so, like, a lot of the technology that came out after this film, you could really see the way it's depicted in iRobot and saying, like, yep, that's exactly what it would be like. So it's not so far-fetched that it just seems like fancy. It's like, oh yeah, I can see this. I can see how this
Yeah,
would be, used now. And it's just really well done. They do a great job in terms of like the pre-production. They created like a completely new model car just to show like this is what a futuristic car would look like. And this looks really sleek. It has a lot of the same designs that you see later in Teslas, and the cyber trucks, where it's like, oh yeah, I can see where the future technology was realistically depicted in this film.
yeah, exactly. And for those of you that are thinking like, oh, this is so unrealistic, nothing will ever be like this, or nothing will ever be this extreme, whatever. Let's put this into perspective. We are having this conversation, recording this episode through a Zoom call through our computers, which are connected to literally everything in the world. Who knows what could be listening in while we're having this Zoom call? And number two, how many times have you just said something idly just in your day-to-day life and then opened Amazon and then get recommended that exact same thing?
Yep, that was the first thing I thought when I was watching this. I was like, this predicted easily that same type of future. And so they do a really good job of making a very well-grounded, realistic, but futuristic society where
Yeah.
you can see and understand why robots have been given the jobs they do. You see them, taking out the trash. You see them doing deliveries, and it just
Yeah.
really makes sense.
And this is something I say all the time. Literally, I think in every recording where we bring up robots, where I just say, you know what, for all those jobs that robots are replacing, how many people really love those jobs? How many people are pumping their fist saying, like, yeah, I love lugging around garbage, or like, yeah, I love delivering packages in the mail and snow and rain and getting attacked by dogs. I love it. It's the good stuff right there.
Yeah, and that brings up an interesting debate where I've seen quotes, I don't want to mess them up, but people basically quoted saying like, I would love for, AI to do my manual labor so I can focus on doing art. I don't want AI to do my art so I can focus on doing manual labor.
Exactly. But the thing is, that's the sad point where we are right now.
Yes. And one of the scenes that I really liked in the film, you see the robot Sonny, which has been accused of murder. He's talking to Detective Spooner, and Detective Spooner is basically just berating the robot, saying, like,
Yeah,
you're
pretty much badgering the suspect to get something out of him.
yeah. And one of the things he says to him is essentially like, people like you robots, you don't have, souls, you don't have the creativity, you can't
Yeah,
create a symphony or a work of art. And then Sonny just is back to him like, well, can you do that either? Which I thought was a very interesting point, especially now that we have a place where you have generative AI. They can say, yeah, I can create an image, I can create a movie like a human. So I was like, wow, that was really ahead of its time compared to where we are now in 2025.
yeah. And again, a robot is only as advanced as the parts it's made with. So not every robot's gonna be creating a symphony or like the best art. But if they get enough time, they probably would be if they wanted to, pretty much. That's pretty much what we have in this movie. Even though Sonny's like, can you create a symphony or like a masterpiece? And like a few minutes later, when he's describing his dreams, he does a perfect sketch of what his dreams look like.
Yeah, and I like how it's kind of one of the ways you can tell the technology is dated because as Sonny the robot is drawing, he draws it like a dot matrix printer would draw.
Yeah,
It comes out gets super detailed, of course, but it's like, oh, this is how a robot would draw like a printer would. Where now he was like, oh yeah, we're like with generative AI, it doesn't look like a printer would draw it. It just looks like exactly what it's depicting. So that's how far we've actually come. So in some ways, we've already advanced past what the movie maker saw the future would be like in 2035.
and here's some for our next cause celebration for this movie. Even though the NS5s have this kind of Uncanny Valley kind of like look to them, a good cause of celebration for this movie is like the actor playing Sonny, pretty much.
Yes.
He has a pretty great he's doing pretty well as acting like a emotionless android, but having slowly developing emotions pretty much. And having that self aware like, what is my purpose? Who am I? And those moments. He does great in those moments too. But it's those moments where he's allowed to emote, where he's like, I did not murder him. You can kind of like slowly like hear the emotion creep into his voice. Where it's like, I did not murder him, and then I did not murder him. It's like it's still like robotic, emotionless, but it has enough emotion to where you believe he's becoming self aware.
Yes. And I think that's where this was back in again 2004. Alan Tudyk, who we mentioned, actor from lots of television shows, movies, he's done some really good, impressive voice work, and I think this is a great example. You have to have a skilled actor who can convey all of those emotions and just the voice. He's not, on screen. I can't recall if they actually did motion capture for Sonny, but mostly he just has to act and convey, just like you mentioned, he has to convey all of this through his voice. And, playing a robot can be, very difficult. It can lead to some really bad performances, obviously, when
Yeah,
people are dragging too robotic.
yeah.
But like you
Even
said,
like even though this is unfair, compare Sonny's performance in this movie to any time Arnold Schwarzenegger has been the Terminator.
yeah. I didn't want
Literally
to name
every
some.
time.
I didn't want to name some people by name, but yeah, it's a good example where it's like it's very different. So having more emotion, having the ability, like you said, to do it in layers, to actually have a character arc, and what you see in the film is that Sonny, just like Detective Spooner, they both go through a character arc in this story that I thought was really well done. And so Sonny is not just a visual effects, and this film was nominated for best visual effects at the Oscars. It's not just like, oh, well, look at this impressive visual effect. It's like, okay, we have to actually make this a well-grounded character, and a large part of that's going to be, from his voice, acting.
It's funny. We've given them both points about their characters in this movie. So should we talk more about their character developments and their backgrounds in this recording?
Yeah, yeah, we should, because I think it
Yeah,
actually works. Go ahead.
yeah. So I wanted to bring up Spoon or Will Smith rather, which is still the stupidest name ever, Spoon.
Yeah. Sounds
But
like it's a very sci-fi name.
I'm not here talking about Spoon. I'm not here talking about the name. I'm talking about his character in this movie. See, Will Smith Spoon in this movie, even though he has, even though his hatred for androids is like extreme, you can't fault him for how he came to that point, which is the biggest compliment I can give.
Yes, and I think that's one of the things that the story did really well. And that's why even in rewatch, knowing that, Detective Spooner, he has a pretty big secret that you're not aware of until like kind of halfway through the film. But on rewatch, all the clues are there. And I was like, oh, that's really well done. I really love the way that they did that. So you can go
Yeah,
ahead.
Spoon here, he's a cop, number one. But here's the thing: randomly one day, while he was driving home next to him, he got into a bad accident with this girl that died in the car over. Pretty much no one's fault. Pretty much it was just one of those things that happened, and they both ended up tumbling into a river. A passing android saw them and reached in to rescue Spoon instead of the girl. So that pretty much had an 11% chance of living. Spoon had a 45% chance, and so logically, the robot saved him instead of her. But he didn't get out of it scot free either. He lost his entire left arm. His entire left arm had to be replaced with cybernetics. His lungs and ribs had to be replaced with cybernetics too. Pretty much, it was a bad day. Pretty much, and that's why he hates androids so much, because he says 11% would have been more than enough for a human.
This is the overwhelming thing that really drives him. He hates the cold, calculated nature that the robots use to make decisions that he believes a person wouldn't make. He thinks that obviously you would save the small child rather than the adult. The robots don't think that way. And he never forgave not only the robots, but himself. Because even when he's telling the story, and again, I think this was great acting from Will Smith in this whole scene, he says, I didn't save her. Although again, like you said, there was nothing he could have done to save either of them. He just hates the fact that him being there essentially meant that the girl wouldn't be saved. And in the story, I like that this is never revealed that Will Smith has this robotic arm. You see him wake up in the morning, and another great character trait that they kind of show about him. Every day when he wakes up, he has a gun in his hand. And so
Yeah,
you get the idea that this is the guy who doesn't trust anybody. He has his gun hanging right next to him in the shower. And you
yeah,
see him kind of rotating his arm and lifting weights. You think, oh, yeah, he's just waking up because he's stiff in the morning. It's not until later during one of the action scenes where he's fighting a robot and the robot hits him with a pipe and he blocks it. And I remember the first time I saw that, I was like, man, these writers are really dumb. Come on, that pipe would have broken his arm. Then it's like, oh, wait, he has a metal arm. So he's basically Bucky.
yeah. This is pretty much Winter Soldier, but as a huge race.
Yeah. But I love
That's
that
bad.
reveal.
That
That was
yeah,
something that was like when you watch it in hindsight, you see all the clues to his, robotic arm. You see, or even his grandmother mentioning like being thankful, that he it was brought back to her. They never explain why it is. So I was like, oh, that's actually really nice storytelling where you kind of figure out like, oh, he's got this secret that, he hates the fact that, it was against his will, but he had part of his body replaced by robotic parts and he
yeah.
just still was like a very anti-robot person.
And to connect the 2 points, the parts that are inside Will are experimental parts made by the company, but the doctor that was killed were the ones that personally put them inside of Will, so they do have a connection together.
Yes.
They knew each other personally.
Yes. And more importantly, that doctor knows that Spooner hates robots. And so the doctor's essentially using his prejudice of saying, okay, I need the person I know who hates robots the most to kind of solve this crime. So you
Yeah,
would be the one to do it.
yeah. You know he's such a huge racist that he won't give this up.
Yeah. Which plays to some very interesting things because there are a couple of times, not really like overly done, where they clearly point out the fact that, Spooner being so bigoted and racist, if you can say that against robots, it's kind of the same way somebody would treat a black person. So it'd be like somebody saying, like, wait, I can't say that a black person killed me, so I'm gonna get the most racist cop I know. He's gonna automatically find the black person who did
Yeah,
this.
very ironic that our protagonist is black, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought that actually added something to the story. But yeah, so you see Spooner's journey through the film is to, come to see these robots not as human, but he just kind of warms up to them in more ways to see at least Sonny as being different. And it's kind of a trope at that point where saying like, yeah, it's like a race is making at least one black friend, maybe. So it's kind of the journey that you see him going on, but it's a genuine journey.
Yeah, I wouldn't see this as a white savior movie. I see it
No,
more
no.
like I would see this more as like two equally as flawed characters coming together.
Yeah, because I think that's again the good thing that Will Smith does in his acting at the end. He recognizes that it was his own prejudice, his extreme prejudice was the reason that he was even picked to do this by the guy who, killed himself and said, like, yeah, that's why you picked me to do this. Like he kind of had a moment like, wow, am I that bad? Like that's why like
Yeah.
he handpicked me to investigate this.
Yeah, it's funny because there was also the moment where he's being attacked in the tunnel. He was like, "There's no way my luck is this bad, right?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Because even though you can say like, okay, even though he recognizes that he has his own prejudice, he's like thinking, oh, like, okay, this is too crazy for me. Just be crazy here. Something is happening here.
Yeah, the subway, tunnel chase action scene is just so great. It's really well done. That has some great Will Smith quips. I can't think if that's his first. Oh hell no! But like I felt like that was just one of his trademarks back in the day, and I was just like, that's just classic Will
Yeah,
Smith throughout that whole scene.
there was only one quip that didn't work that's sticking out in my mind. It's the one in the finale where
Yes,
he's about to inject Vicky and he
yeah,
says,
that's
"You've
just
still got to die."
yeah,
That one
that
was
makes no
awful.
sense. It's awful. Like, you had to have a better line or something to say there. So yeah, I would agree. I don't mind his quippiness in this film. The moment we
But
pointed out
yeah,
earlier,
the problem is that that quip was terrible.
it was just a terrible quip. But yeah, like I did like Detective Spooner's backstory. I like how it was revealed in the story, and it kind of bridges really nicely with Sonny. And so, do you want to talk about Sonny's journey now?
Yeah, Sonny. This robot is pretty much the Jesus android, pretty much. So the director that allegedly committed suicide, he built Sonny to have self awareness, so he wouldn't just be another just pretty much slave to the three laws and the slave to the contradiction that are the three laws. And which, by the way, while we're on the three laws, they were pretty much made vague on purpose to where this error could happen.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that any story about the three laws talks about, like just how problematic the three laws are. And I would argue, I will talk about that at the end. You could change one word in the three laws and eliminate this entire story.
Yeah, but yeah, the
Yes, Sonny
but here's
has a second processing system in addition to his positronic brain. So, like, no other robot has that second processing
yeah,
system that Sonny has.
yeah, but here's the thing though. That thing is great. Even though with his self awareness, he's still abided by the three laws. Because spoiler alert, what happened in this movie is that the doctor didn't kill himself. He made. Here's what happened. The doctor told Sonny to promise him to follow his order, and then he told him to kill him. And even though it directly contradicts harming a human, he has to follow the order.
Yes, because unlike the other robots, he has a second processing system that allows him to think and do other things. And you get the idea that Sonny is essentially like really emotionally torn over what he did because he's like, wait, but I had to do it because I promised him that I would do it. And so like he doesn't understand how to reconcile, that with those three directives. But yeah, great character arcs from them. So you see throughout the film, Sonny coming to terms with, the emotions that he's feeling, being told to do something that he later wishes in many ways that he hadn't done, and kind of figuring out what his ultimate purpose is. Let's take a quick break and then we'll come back with our causes of death. Tired of modern clothing that fits properly, doesn't smell like an attic, and hasn't already survived two recessions? Then you're ready for Classic Clothes, the first subscription box for people who refuse to wear anything made after the Cold War. Every month we'll send you genuine vintage garments that are at least 30 years old, sometimes 40. Pants with mysterious stains and pockets deep enough to hold your buyer's remorse. T-shirts from companies that no longer exist, bands that broke up before you were born, and slogans that nobody even understands anymore. Hats that are either ironically cool or tragically cursed. There's really no in between.
And don't worry, we never include anything with moisture wicking fabrics, stretch panels, or techwear. If it was designed with comfort in mind, it didn't make the cut. Because we know that you don't follow trends. You follow grandma's attic, yard sales, and that one weird thrift store that used to be an illegal front for something. And for a limited time, use promo code POSTMORTEM to receive a complimentary "This was cool before you were born" bumper sticker. Classic clothes. Dress like the past never left, because to you, it didn't. Okay, and we're back. So now we're diving to our causes of death. And for me, the first kind of big cause of death is that despite the fact that this film was nominated for an Oscar for Best Visual Effects, I feel that a lot of the effects in the film don't look good at all.
Yeah,
And
here's the thing. I feel like they're dated now.
yeah, and so I just felt like most of it didn't look good. And it's clear that Sunny is not there. It's clear most of the robots aren't there. A lot of the background scenes. I was like, they really just the compositing, it just doesn't hold up anymore. And so it just looks like it's slapped on top of the film. You never really feel that Sunny is in the scenes. The lighting is usually off. And so like, it just doesn't look good anymore.
Yeah, well, this is one of those things that are definitely a product of its time right there. Which is funny because Transformers happened a few years later, and the CGI there looked amazing.
Yeah.
It made I, Robot look even worse on rewatch.
Yeah, and so like that was where I wasn't surprised that this lost to I think it lost to Spider-Man 2, at the Oscars. I'm
Oh,
like, yeah, I was like the visual effects here really didn't work most of the time. And so like I just felt that that's something that I would love to see, an updated version of this one day with truly amazing like incorporation of CGI effects. It never really holds the film back. It's not something that ruined the film for me, but I just felt like, wow, it just really looks pretty poor, in terms of the believability, especially in big scenes. Like any scene where they have a lot of empty space, the robots just look really bad. And like the car, when it's not the actual physical prop car, it looks very fake. None of that looks believable. So again, we like the way that they describe technology, the use of technology, but in some of the big money shots for the visual effects, I just thought it looked bad.
here's a next cause of death for me, and maybe this is a nitpick, or maybe this was done on purpose, but it irked me how everyone's so like sure of these androids to where they're essentially gaslighting Spoon into thinking he's crazy.
Yeah, I could say that's true. I did not feel that the complete universal love of the robots made sense and it wasn't believable.
Yeah,
You can't convince all people now to like iPhones compared to, an Android phone or anything. So it was very kind of one-sided, which did not
yeah.
seem realistic.
To where he was the only one out of this entire city that believed that androids could be a problem.
Yes. So like I think that was a little bit too much. And I'll talk about in a possible script stitch up one of the ways I think they could have, changed that a little bit. Okay, so let's dive into our script stitch ups. And we talked about the fact that Detective Spooner is a person who hates, technology. He hates robots. He has kind of a backstory that explains that. One of the things that I felt interesting, and I don't think this actually, ruins the film. I don't think it would be something that would actually make it much better. I thought it would be interesting if he actually was an older character. Part of me felt like his hatred of new technology would make more sense if he was an older character who was more old fashioned. I just sometimes found like, well, it'd be kind of more of a stretch for me to believe that a younger character would be so anti-technology because just maybe I'm biased, but I feel that younger people or people who come up with technology would naturally like it more. And so I felt like, well, what if this was a much older character? His hatred would kind of make more sense. Like as we were joking, it's like saying like, oh yeah, this is the old racist guy, not a young racist. So
Yeah,
that's kind
it's
of what
just
I
like
thought would be interesting.
you hear that, old heads? We're calling you out. We're calling
Yeah.
you out for being closed-minded jerks.
Yeah, and so like I just felt like yeah, it would make more sense if you had an older actor as opposed to Will Smith playing this role.
And so here's a stitch up for me. I feel like we've talked about this already. To where like if we're gonna be making Spooner to be this extremely prejudiced guy and make it so where he's not the only one. Because
Yes.
what we have in the movie is just unrealistic, in my opinion, to where, like, he's the only one in this entire city that is to this extreme. And honestly, if we're going to go this route, make some other people even more extreme so we're more grounded with him in regards of everyone else.
Exactly. This is the kind of guy who would only hang out with people who were kind of like him. And that's what you see normally. You see people kind of find groups, support structures to, make themselves feel more comfortable. So the idea that he's alone in his beliefs, I don't really like. And that's where I
Yeah,
feel the film doesn't really flesh him out as a character. In some ways, I don't mind. That's one of the things we always talk about. If you have a central story that's intriguing enough, you don't need extra stuff. So there's no romantic angle here. Dr. Calvin and Spooner, they're not a romantic
yeah.
couple because
And
again,
plus they didn't really need it, honestly.
yeah, you don't need it. You hear, Spooner's grandmother talking about his ex-wife, but you don't really get any backstory other than the fact that this is the guy that hates robots. This is why you don't need the other stuff. But also, like, because of that, the only other person that you see him interact with is Shia LaBeouf's character, who's just, I guess, this local kid or whatever. And so you don't
Yeah.
feel
And
that
so, yeah, just think of it this way. Here's a trademark Isaiah analogy for you. Let's put it like this. Let's say one, because Spoon in this movie is like, man, androids, they're just machines and clockwork. They're not human inside. Have him pass by like another character. He's like, man, or have him pass by another character who's like just pretty much going off saying like, yeah, these machines, they're the devil. They killed Jesus. And you're just like, wait, whoa, calm down there, buddy.
yes, exactly.
It's like you're going a little bit too far in this extremism.
Yeah, and that's where, for a guy who had a robot arm put in his body against his will, show some people who would say like, I don't care, I don't want robot doctors, or people who would rather die than let a robot touch them, show where he is on this range because that is, like you said, this is true to society. You don't usually have one outlier, only one way of people thinking about it. So I thought a little bit more of not just character development for him, but actual fleshing out of kind of the gradient of people's how they thought in society would actually
Yeah.
be better there.
It's funny too because this movie also reminded me of a game that was really beautiful. It was Detroit Become Human for all you gamers out there, and there's this character Hank that pretty much has the exact same journey that Spoon has in this movie. To where by the end of it, he realizes like, okay, I have prejudice here, and the real problem here was humans, pretty much. But that's what happens in Detroit anyway. And the line is so good that it stays in my mind years later, to where he's like, "My son died because some human was too high in order to operate on my son. A human killed my kid, not an android."
Yeah. And I think that's where, in some ways, I thought that the film it really flew by. Like I said, it's only like a little under
Yeah,
2 hours, and I actually felt that a little bit more time, maybe 10, 15 minutes more of fleshing out some of the characters, some of the society would have actually benefited the story.
yeah. I had enough time to get lunch in between watching the movie and stopping and record.
Yeah, and so that's another thing that I felt. The story really, at least the beginning story, centers around Dr. Lanning and his supposed suicide or murder. I felt we didn't really ever get to know him
Yeah,
because
we the
we
only thing we do is just see the only thing we hear from him is his speeches or his cryptic messages.
Yes, and he's supposedly, close enough to Detective Spooner and Dr. Calvin, but we don't see any interactions, any flashbacks with either of these characters. So, as kind of even a narrative, like grounding character, I just felt that he was not essential enough to be the driving force of the story. It's almost like, oh, well, you just needed to know if a robot killed a person. The fact that it
Yeah,
was landing, it didn't really even matter that much.
yeah. It's funny because his death is pretty much the MacGuffin to move the story forward.
Yes. And so I felt like they had James Cromwell. You got a great actor. Come on, like give me something, maybe even give me something before he dies, with this character to kind of get the story going so that I actually care about figuring out who killed him. And so like I just felt like that was an interesting thing to start the story with a person who's already dead that we see only in limited, either holographic, messages or recordings. And so give James Cromwell more to do. He's a great actor, put him on screen more.
Yeah,
All right, so I think that's all we have for our script stitch ups. And so let's just revisit kind of our overall thoughts. So this is a film that I enjoyed on rewatch. I thought that Will Smith did a good job with giving the story, even though it kind of floats between two different genres, a psychological kind of mystery thriller and an action movie. I thought he did a good job, bridging those types of films together to give us a character who we are interested in following. It's entertaining, although the visual effects don't hold up really well anymore. Just the realistic world that they created, showing how technology would be infused in our, daily lives has been scarily accurate in some ways. And again, this is a film that, despite only being 2 hours, I felt I got enough story that I liked it. It's something I would even rewatch. Great voice work by Alan Tudyk. And so I will stay with my 3.5 out of 5 stars.
Yeah, I'm sticking with that too. I feel like even though, despite the flaws of this movie, we still have a solid story to where, like, if this is your first time watching it, you will be entertained. Maybe not so much on consequent rewatches, but for what this movie is, it's still solid.
Yeah, and I think that's, like you said, the most important thing. A movie should be entertaining. You should be able to walk away with a message. And I think that's why we have, mentioned a couple of things that we would add to the story. It's probably best that it's not longer. This it gets in and gets out quickly. You have time to be entertained, but you're not bored. It doesn't have a lot of excess bloat that would kind of weigh the story down. And I think this is just one of those great quintessential Will Smith films from the early 2000s. And so if you're a fan of Will Smith, sci-fi, I think this is actually, one of the best kind of examples of this type of genre film from early 2000s. And so check it out. As we mentioned, this one is free. It's on Tubi, and you can catch it there. And thanks for the recommendation for this, Isaiah. I thought this was a good choice.
You're welcome. I'm happy. Even though I was complaining a whole lot, I was happy to rewatch this.
Yeah, it's good. I enjoyed revisiting the Will Smith era. And so that's it for this episode of Movie Postmortem. Don't forget to like and subscribe and give us 5 stars because even bad podcasts deserve a good review. Remember, whether it's good, bad, or just a guilty pleasure, every movie deserves a postmortem. Thanks for listening.
And as always, I did not murder him. We'll see you next time.